This is PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan Mannarino. Welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. It is, October 15th. All right. So remember I told you yesterday, just to kind of get some orders of business out of the way, that you had until yesterday to vote, to register to vote in the state of New Jersey. So if you haven't registered to vote, you cannot vote in the election for governor. You can still register to vote here in New York, but make sure you do that because early voting is starting in about 2 weeks. October 25th is when early voting begins. All right. So that's what you need to know as we continue our conversation. Send in your questions. This week, I'm going one-on-one with Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee. Last week, I spoke to Andrew Cuomo. Next week, I'm speaking to Zoran Mamdani. Hundreds of you have already answered that call for questions for Curtis Sliwa. I'm going through some of those right now, and make sure to bring him those questions this Friday when I speak to him to air on PIX on Politics at 6:30 p.m. And then we'll put out the call for Zoran Mamdani as well. But right now, we're going to be talking about a book. I don't know if you've seen the headlines or heard about this book. It's called Political Humanity. It is written by Jasmine Ray. She is the author behind it, and it really is a inside look at a relationship that she had with Mayor Eric Adams and what played out after that relationship, into the indictments, the trial, and what she hopes you take away from the book. There's a lot to talk about. Jasmine's joining me now. So great to have you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's talk about this. The book is titled Political Humanity. I know you've been out there talking about it for a while now, right? But it's new for our audience. What is the book about? Give me the synopsis in your own words.
Well, it's about being able to see past the headlines. It's about, recognizing the humanity in each and every one of us, not just political figures, but even people within our tight circles.
But it really is zeroing in on a relationship that you had with Mayor Eric Adams, right? And you describe in the book that it was a hidden relationship. Why? Why was it hidden?
I wouldn't say it was hidden.
I mean, people didn't know about it.
Yeah, people, well, because it took place 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So that's sort of one of the confusions right now is like, did she date the mayor while she was working for the administration? The answer is no. We literally dated in 2014 and 2015, which now it's going on 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, and just for those who don't know, yes, you had a job. You were the sports czar, first ever
Yes.
city sports czar under the mayor's administration. But there was a lot of time that lapsed between the relationship and him becoming mayor. So
That's
take
right.
me back to the beginning and what exactly played out with this relationship that you had with the mayor before he was the mayor.
So at the time he was Brooklyn Borough president, I think he had just become Brooklyn Borough president. It was 2014. I believe he was elected in 2013. And at the time, I was already, knee deep in the sports industry. I had founded a nonprofit organization that organized sports across the city, more grassroots situation. We had thousands of kids that used to follow us from borough to borough. Anything low barrier of entry, I was organizing it because I wanted to make sure it was free and
Yeah.
accessible for kids. And then a couple of years after that, I was a sports consultant with Red Bull. And so I met Eric Adams at my Red Bull suite in the Barclays Center. He walked into my suite. So that's how we met.
Okay.
Mhm.
And it evolved into a relationship.
Yeah. So we spent the first, 15 months getting to know each other. We were really good friends. And then, yeah, it eventually evolved into a relationship in like mid 2015. And it only lasted a couple of months.
Yeah. And you say it ended when he was becoming the mayor or was running for mayor.
So at the time, I didn't know, and I don't even think he was running. He wasn't running at the time, right?
Mhm.
It was 2016. I'm not sure when he announced, but he broke it off with me in January of 2016, and made a couple of statements like, there's something I need to pursue. I'm distracted. I'm not focused. I kind of want to like protect you from this thing. I can't have you in my life anymore.
But in reading the book and talking about the relationship, it seemed like it was more than just a fling. He said he called you that one day you were going to be his wife. So I guess when you look at the timing of the release, right? You write this book. Would you have released it if he was still running for reelection? It comes out right after he makes this announcement that he's not going to seek reelection. Would you have released the book regardless?
I would have waited until he was out of office. That was my intention. It wasn't supposed to come out for like a year from now. I just, I was in the middle of building a team, finalizing everything. But he did call me and said, I'm dropping out. And I was like, no, like, why? I understand the poll numbers, but the polls have been wrong in the past, right? There are a lot of people on the ground that I see, and I've, walked plenty of times with him in public, and people on the ground are very supportive of him. So I didn't feel like he should have dropped out. And so I said, well, if you're dropping out, like, I'm gonna tell your story because there's still time. We have, I think he dropped out on the 3rd. I dropped the book on the 5th.
Yep.
And I said, I have a month. I have a month to tell your story. And I would love to tell people who you truly are.
Why did you feel that it was your job to tell his story rather than him who says, "You're all gonna love the book I write one day, and I'm gonna tell my story"? Why did you feel like it was your responsibility?
That's a great question. And I hope that he didn't feel like I overstepped in that sense. So a few reasons. One, I felt like he was, with all due respect, running an ineffective communication strategy. I didn't think that he was running an effective campaign. I thought that he wasn't getting a fair shake from the media. He went, months campaigning, and there was no movement in the polls, right? And so, I was kind of like witnessing. I felt like my friend was getting jumped.
Mm.
I felt like people were gaining up on him, and so, that was one reason why I said, "You know what? I feel like I'm an effective communicator. That's what I've done my whole life."
Yeah.
I created an organization for handball, and handball's been around hundreds of years in New York City, but it was the marketing, it was the communication that made the sport cool, right? So, like, I understand how people like to receive information. So I felt like I could tell his story, but also authentically, right?
Yeah.
I'm somebody that knows him. So I didn't feel as though he was coming across authentically. And I said, okay, I feel like I can tell your story from an authentic uh, perspective.
I want to break down a couple things, layers that you
Sure.
just said right there, because I want to get into the media thing and I want to get into some things about his trial, but I want to talk about the relationship. I don't know if you saw him last week. He was questioned about a particular moment in your book, and the mayor got very defensive about it. So let me just read part of the passage for you, okay? It
Sure.
says, "He crossed the space between us, you're at Borough Hall, with a look that said he already knew that whatever came next, there was no turning back. He didn't ask, he didn't explain. He just looked at me, and in that look, I knew he had his mind made up." You then write, "After we crossed that line," and go on to talk about the story. People assumed that meant a specific thing happened at Borough Hall. I think you get what I'm getting at here. So what happened at Borough Hall?
The relationship evolved. That was the first time we
When
had.
you say evolved, though, the mayor got defensive because people wrote about that you guys, had sex within Borough Hall. Did
Yeah.
you?
No, absolutely not. No. And I'm glad you mentioned it because I feel like the Daily News needs to be called out for, writing a blatant lie. Within the passage of that article, they said Ray wrote and then proceeded to quote me in something that I never said. So, that's highly irresponsible journalism.
So what happened within Borough Hall?
A kiss. A kiss. And then eventually, the relationship evolved. But it went from a friendship to something more in that moment.
I- I- you know, then years pass, right? And I'm sorry to jump around here. I'm just trying to, that was one thing I wanted to get the record straight on because the mayor seemed to get pretty defensive about it.
I would have been too.
Yeah. You get this job within the administration once he becomes mayor, but you hadn't been together for quite some time. You hadn't spoken in quite some time. And so people were asking now, looking back on it, did you get the job because you knew the mayor and because of your history, or because of the merits and resume that you provided? You talked about your history within sports. What do you think?
It's not what I think is what I know. I did the job for about 12 years before
Yeah.
transitioning into City Hall. And, like I tell everyone, I would think people would be pretty foolish to question my resume. I've lived pretty publicly for the last decade, and everything that I've done and achieved has been online. It's all a matter of record. From beginning my own organization to being literally a sports consultant for one of the largest sporting brands in the country, if not the world. And I did that for 7 years. So I understood the job. And it's funny because, also the thing I've heard is like he created this job for me. He didn't. De Blasio actually launched the office during his tenure. And then, when Eric was elected, he said to me early on, there's this thing, like, I think you'd be perfect for it. And initially I said no. I didn't want to work. He offered me a job when he was borough president, and I said no. So I don't particularly, I think there's just a lot of bureaucracy in government. It's
Yeah.
tough to navigate. I'm an entrepreneur. I love the space. I hadn't worked for anybody for over 15 years. And so, government wasn't appealing to me
Mhm.
at all. But what was appealing to me was Eric and what he cared about and his mission. And if I felt like I could be helpful to him in that moment, then that's why I accepted the job.
In the book, you call him a flawed hero.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
It, as he likes to say, I'm perfectly imperfect. But I still think he's a hero in my eyes. I think he's very courageous. I think that a lot of the things that he quote unquote got in trouble for was standing up against his own party, standing up to the sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden. To bring visibility and conversation about the migrant crisis and the fact that we weren't maintaining or protecting the border, and so um, for me, anybody that speaks up, regardless of who's in the seat, regardless of who it is courageous. And I think that we have to stop villainizing people who are courageous.
In that part where you called him the flawed hero, you were talking about the investigations and you said they were scrutinized. Looking back and knowing what you know now, was he wrong in any of the things he accepted?
R hmm. So I like to say tacky. He doesn't like when I say that, but, airplane upgrades, it's tacky. Especially if leveraging your position. I don't know that that's what he did, but that's what he was accused of doing.
Yeah.
If that's what he did, it's tacky. Do I think it's criminal? No. And then the other thing was, asking for the FDNY to do an
Yeah.
inspection. He didn't say pass them. He said do the inspection. Right. So is that criminal? No.
And then you got dragged into it. I mean, there were
Yeah.
you were had testified between the grand jury what 4 times
Yeah. So I was subpoenaed four
or subpoenaed
times.
4 times.
I testified, I think 2 or 3 times.
And
Yeah.
what was the for you in that moment, right? You're now having to talk about some of these things. What was that experience for you?
It was. I mean, I experienced a high level of anxiety. I've always struggled with anxiety, especially living in New York. If you grew up in New York City, I'm sure everybody's anxious here. But um, I felt like I mean, like the walls were closing in on me. It was scary. It was
You were labeled the
scary.
star witness.
I was labeled the star slash key witness for something that I had no understanding of, and to this day still have no understanding
So
of.
you didn't know about the airplane upgrades, the building inspection.
I read it with the general public. As soon as Damian Williams published it, I read it with everybody else. And yeah, I mean, when I read it, I said, okay, I don't know that this is rises to the level of, indicting a city mayor of New York
Yeah.
City. I thought it was a little much. And I don't have a law degree, but still.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
was that. There was also some folks who the mayor brought on board that either had to be let go or left on their own, and
Mhm.
some questioned whether or not they should have been in the administration at all. And the reason I'm asking this is because you say you want to look at the person beyond the title.
Yeah.
But did he bring in some people that he shouldn't have?
Hmm. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. You know why? Because some of the people that he brought in that kind of got caught up in that scandal, and I hate to even call it that. Let's call it a misunderstanding. I felt as though I knew these people personally. So in a sense, like Winnie Greco, for example, the whole potato chip,
Yep.
money in a bag potato. I do feel like there was a cultural disconnect there. I hope that doesn't sound like an excuse, but I'm being honest when I say that. But I find her to be a really good person. And, I just feel like good people can sometimes make mistakes.
You criticized the press, and that was one of the things I wanted to come back to. Right? You
Yes.
talk about you wrote in the book, negative press tends to overpower the good. The nature of hyper-driven media, fear-mongering, fabricated controversy have a much louder voice.
Yeah.
What are you referring to?
Well, I mean, I had my own experience. So it's funny because when the book came out, and Eric read it, he said, "Jazz, it's a beautiful book." And but I hate the fact that they're going to pick it apart and they're not going to report on it for what it is. And anybody that's read the book says the same thing. Like, not only do they have a clearer perspective of government, but they also have a clear perspective of Eric. And I've never met anybody that has walked away saying that they had a negative view of him. If anything, they've said that I've gotten comments like, "I wish this came out 6 months ago.
Mhm.
Is it still too late to vote for him?" But I've had my own run-in with the press. When I was a sports director, I had posted on my social media that I support President Trump's executive order to protect women's sports. It was a reference to Title IX. And while I still stand firm on that, the next day I woke up and I was being called transphobic. That's not true. I don't have a phobia of anything. I love everybody equally. And I even, I called the councilwoman the next day, who's part of the LGBTQ community, and I said, "Can we sit down and have a conversation? Because I think this is a big misunderstanding."
Yeah.
Um, and I sat down with members of the trans community. I said, "How can I help? What can I do to make sure that you feel like you're being seen and you're being heard and that you can compete and that everything is fair?" But I mean, that's just an example of like the media sort of misconstruing something that I said and making it bigger than what it
Yeah,
was.
I mean, I've read the excerpts about this book. I mean,
Mhm.
the articles about this book, and it seems that everyone's really treating the book at face value, talking to you about it, getting your expertise. But you again, you go into detail. You said people like Katie. I'm guessing you're referring to.
Katie, I believe her last name is
Okay,
Homan.
yep. You said who she bends the truth, manipulates facts, creates conflict where none exist, have contributed to the decline of legacy media.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Are you
gave you the
referring?
example.
Yes, but are you
Yeah.
referring to the coverage of Eric Adams?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I gave you the example of Winnie Greco, who, is a wonderful person, and I feel like is well-meaning. But, I listen, I even when I saw the news, I called her and I said, "Winnie, what the heck?" And she was like, "Jazz, I know it was stupid. It was a mistake." You
But it's the
know,
job of the media to go and find. That's an odd thing to happen where somebody gives you a
it's
money in a potato chip bag.
I will be the first person to say it's odd.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But within the same
and to ask questions and hold people accountable and hold people's feet to the
within the same
fire.
chapter that you're referring to, I believe it's chapter 8, public perception. I also give the media their credit. I say that, and I genuinely believe that we need the media. I think that they're the first line of, I think you guys are the first line of defense. I think that if you didn't exist, government would go wild. I think corruption would be out of control. So I do believe that there's a place for everybody. But I do think that there's a line, right? I think right now we're towing a line, and I think the temperature is a little too hot, too heavy, too high in the city. And I think that the media plays a role in exacerbating things that that sometimes don't even exist, which is a problem because tensions are high
Yeah,
right now, and everybody can agree with that. And if you make something like this book salacious, which it's not, it doesn't have any sex in it. I think that that's irresponsible journalism.
I hear you.
Mhm.
But when you have a book like this that comes out with a mayor who's a one-term mayor who
Yeah.
is leaving and not, there is going to be questions asked about it, which is why we're coming
100%.
right to the
Yeah.
source, to you, to talk about it, right? The portrayal that I think some people walk away with when you look at things like this about manipulation of facts and creating conflict where there's not, can be said. Mayor has often echoed that as well.
Yeah.
But you're the second most powerful person in the country, really. It's the second most powerful office in the country.
Mhm.
Do you think that the press has an obligation to ask tough questions?
Absolutely. I mean, I even love that you're pushing back on me.
Yeah.
I think that you have an obligation to ask tough questions. And I have an obligation as somebody who wrote a book. And Eric has an obligation as an elected official to answer those questions, regardless of how he feels about them. But I do believe that at the same time, you have a responsibility to be responsible about the questions that you're asking. And that's all that I'm asking of
Yeah.
the press is just be responsible, right? I understand that headlines sell. I get it. And again, I'm in favor of the press. I mean, let me just say too, I want to give people a shout out. Dana Rubenstein, New York Times.
Mhm.
She wrote a fair article, right?
On your book.
I didn't particularly like everything that was in there, but I thanked her because I said you are fair, and that's all that we can ask for. Kelly Mena, New York One, fair. Kelly Grace Price, City and State, fair. Right? There are a lot of people out there. Hellgate just wrote an article. I didn't like the title, but I was like, you know what? You were fair, right? So I think fair is all that we can
Yeah,
ask for.
I got you.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, when people read the book,
yeah.
what do you want them to take away from it?
Well, it's funny because just a few seconds ago, you said, Eric Adams is out the race. His name is still on the ballot. He might not be campaigning, actively campaigning, but I don't think that that stops anybody like me or somebody who supports him to campaign on his behalf. So he's still on the ballot. I wouldn't say he's out the race. I would say he's just not
Are you
actively
going to vote for him?
campaigning. Am I going to vote for him? I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to vote this election cycle, but um, I think so your question was, what do I hope people take away?
Yeah.
I hope that people walk away having a better understanding of who Eric Adams is. I think that New York City got it wrong with this mayor. I think that he deserves a second term. And I also want to say the fact that, it's not just about him. We had an administration of wonderful people. We have amazing commissioners. well-meaning people that work really, really hard. And I hate the fact that, we just zero in on this one
Yeah.
individual when we had an administration full of public servants who do the job really well. And, I could spend days talking about the accomplishments of this administration, but yeah.
Yeah, we're out of time. But Jasmine, I appreciate you coming on to talk. I know I'm tough, but I hope you think I was fair
I
at the same time.
appreciate you. You
Yes.
should be tough.
Yeah, I've been told I'm tough but fair, so
Yeah.
I'll take that. Book is out now wherever books are sold. Make sure you get your copy. And that will do it for Picks on Politics Daily, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow.